Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar on asset management, modernizing how utilities manage their assets. It's a pleasure to be here with you again today. My name is Matt Piper and I'm the Global Industry Director for Utilities and AEC, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm also very fortunate today to be joined by two of my Esri colleagues, Bill Meehan, who's the Director of Electric Utility Solutions, and Tyler Pilarczyk, a solution engineer based out of here in California. Welcome, gents, and thank you for co-presenting today. How you doing?
Hello, everybody. We're doing well.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. I'm pretty excited about this webinar today. We have a wonderful lineup of content, and some of the demonstrations you'll see hopefully will help you transform the way that you are modernizing your asset management within your companies. So let's get started. The 2019 GeoConnects Electric and Gas webinar series is well underway. We're halfway through now. We've already run a webinar on safety management back in April, and 2 months ago we ran one on grid modernization, which was effectively the largest webinar we've had in this series. It was very well attended. And last month in July, we had our largest community meetup at our Esri GeoConnects, where we had over 1,000 people from our electric, gas, and telecommunications community. So it was really well attended. So if you missed any of those webinars that we had run earlier, they are now available on our website. So feel free to jump online and you can download those and watch them at your own leisure. But as I said, today's webinar is on asset management. And just a reminder that the webinar is being recorded, and about a week from now, that link will be shared out and you can get access to it. We do need to run through a couple of quick logistics. There is a control panel on your screen. There's a number of things that you can do to improve your experience. But what's most important to us is right in the middle of this screen, there's an ask questions. Your questions are very important to us. So please take the time as we run through this webinar to write down any questions you have. If we say something that sparks some interest, instead of waiting to the end and trying to get them to us, just write them as we go through. We do have some people that are capturing those questions, and at the end of the webinar, if we have time, we'll work through as many of those as we can to get you the answers that you need. If, however, we run out of time and we don't get to answer these questions, we will make the effort and get back to you in a more formal response following this webinar. So the agenda for today, we will be covering off effectively what is asset management. Asset management has been around a long time and it's evolved over its life cycle, and the understanding of asset management best practice has changed. So we're going to take you through some of the ISO 55000 definitions of what asset management, and then we're going to relate these back to how location is actually enabling organizations to move through different maintenance strategies and plans to better enable their utility. Then we're fortunate to have Tyler online today, and he's going to be taking us through some very good demonstrations about GIS enabling asset management. And he's going to focus on the asset lifecycle management, working through some of the performance assessments and the analytics, and finally transitioning utilities and how we can use GIS and asset management to reach optimization about our resourcing, our financials, and our asset management strategies. And as discussed, at the end of this, given time, we'll review and we'll have a quick recap and answer some of these questions and answers that you may have come through. Now, it's always important for us to get a pulse on the audience about who's being involved in this webinar. So we have about 600 people that have registered. So what I'd like you to do is move on to the first poll. Now, the first question we have is really for us to understand what is your current asset management system that you're working with today. So the first one is, I just want you to select one option. The first one is, do you have an enterprise asset management system? This may be something like an SAP or an IBM Maximo, etc. Are you currently using your GIS as your asset management system? Do you have an in-house or a custom one, so it's been developed in-house over the years to meet your requirements? Or you really not have one at the moment, and you're really sort of in that space where you're looking to explore asset management options through the systems that are available. So we'll give you another couple of seconds to see how these results. As I said, just select the one. Okay, and the results are in. Now, Bill, you're very familiar with asset management systems as well. Like, what do you gauge from the results that have come back?
Well, this is interesting, and it's not overly surprising, but it is surprising perhaps is that 17% actually don't have one. But even though about 38% of the folks have an enterprise EAM, I'm guessing that the integration of the enterprise EAM with their GIS is probably not all that strong. 28% have GIS as their asset management system. But again, what does that really mean? Does that mean just the ability to collect assets, or actually using the GIS to do much more logic and have much more analytics? So not overly surprising. I'm surprised that actually about the 17% that really don't even have one at all. That is a little bit surprising. What do you think,
Yeah,
Matt?
I agree. Well, what we hopefully can show today then is on some of the capabilities that we step through is that it really doesn't matter what asset management system you have. The stuff that we'll be demonstrating and the way that this works is you can really maximize or start to get a lot of value out of whatever system you're running with immediately with your GIS platform. So
That's right.
yeah, I agree. So we move on now, Tyler. We really want to get in now to start the content, and we're going to start with defining what asset management is. So asset management for a long time, well, as long as I can remember, I worked for many years in an asset management teams at a power company. It's always been a balancing act. And as this diagram represents, that the objective of asset management is to maximize the performance of the assets while minimizing the risk, and doing this within existing resource, cost and compliance constraints. So it's always been, a balancing act. Now, Bill, as you talked about, you work in the utility before. How does this definition relate, and how do you see this?
Well, I think it's a problem for utilities in many cases, and I think there's two issues that they have to deal with. One is that organizations tend to be siloed, and that's why it's difficult to do this kind of balancing act. When I was working for the power company, I ran electric operations. I had maintenance people, and all the maintenance people really saw was that they had to deal with the immediacy of things that happen right now. Then at the same time, we had engineers who were interested in kind of a long-term capital improvement. And then you had the financial people who were interested primarily in the cost. And then even the customer care people who were interested in, obviously, reliability and customer engagement and so forth. What was difficult, I think, for folks is to get together and see the other person's perspective. So to try to balance, if I'm only having one perspective, it's difficult for me to balance. The other perspective is that as we evolved over time in an organization, those silos of the organizations tended to kind of evolve into the technology. The technology became siloed. That's why I don't think people are looking at it as a broader and across the whole enterprise. And that's really the notion of asset management, to bring the value of assets to the overall organization, not just one department. Matt?
Yeah, well put. There's two things I liked that you talked about there. You talked about the silos, effectively the verticals of the organization, and then you talked about the prioritization. If you're in vertical silos within an asset management, or you're looking at this in a vertical silo, you have conflicting priorities, and then it's very hard to get that overarching or enterprise view about the asset performance and holistically how this relates across your organization. So thanks, Bill. That was a really good summary. Now we move on to talk about the asset management and the life cycle. So this little graphic on the screen, this should be something people are very familiar with, and it's about effectively the workflow or the life cycle an asset takes. So the definition here is from ISO 55000 that asset management is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. Now this is a significant part of defining asset management plans. It relates to how you manage your assets throughout their entire life cycle. Right, so it could be identifying the need for the work, planning the work, acquiring the assets, and going through that logistics and commissioning. Then you go through the whole actual life cycle of the asset as far as operating and maintaining it, setting up your maintenance strategies and your plans, and eventually you have something to do with disposing or replacing that asset at the end of its life cycle. And while this life cycle is accurate, it's important to understand that there are many other different strategies to use when implementing this as best practice. So what we want to talk about today is gaining an understanding, first of all, about where is your utility at on its maintenance plan or a strategy to implement these sort of life cycle plans. And the first part of this is actually understanding your current state to creating a proactive asset management system. So there's many stages in defining your current maintenance strategy or maintenance plans. The first thing is effectively a limited maintenance programming or plan, which is around about, operate to fail. So this typically occurs when you have very limited maintenance plans. Your assets are typically on a plan that they run to fail. And most of the work that gets generated in your works management systems are corrective or forced work orders. The next, which is typically one that most people are very familiar with, is your preventative or routine. Now this is your time-based or planned work. Now the advantage of this is that the utilities get a very good summary to say, here is the amount of work we need to do. We schedule it every 4 years. It's very easy to have resourcing. It's very easy to have budgets and forecasting plans associated with that. So this is typically one that is driven from manufacturer specifications or regulatory compliance. The next one is condition-based. Now, condition-based is where we start introducing these concepts of having a health index on our assets. So this is about understanding, what is the current, condition of my asset? How is it related to the number of failures that have been coming through? And we're starting to bring in a little bit more insights to effectively grade our network. Now, utilities have been trying to move to condition-based maintenance for years, and it's about defining that health by assessing the health of the assets and then applying the maintenance to prevent failures before the asset loses its optimal performance. As we keep moving up the tree, we start introducing these concepts such as reliability center maintenance. Now, reliability center maintenance is about preserving the function of that asset. Now, what function does it perform on the network? How can it fail? What are the causes and subsequent tasks required if that asset does fail? It also brings in additional data such as risk or criticality, and this helps determine, the overall impact and consequence if that asset was to fail. Now, finally, we move up the tree and we reach the state called optimized. Now, optimized is a combination of preventive maintenance, condition-based maintenance, and reliability center maintenance, but it also brings in these other aspects, which is relating it into that whole enterprise view, like Bill was talking about at the start, about how do you bring in now the financial, the capital, the forecasting impacts to really bring all these different strategies together to optimize when and how and at what cost that you'll bring it together. Now, Bill, you've worked, as I said, in operations. Now, how did you go at your utility and how far along this maturity curve were you able to get with your experience?
Well, I think still people, and when I was with the power company, it was primarily preventative. You just kind of go through cycles. So would exercise switches on a time-based system every 3 years, or inspect poles on a regular basis. There was a little bit of condition-based maintenance on obvious things, like people would report on leaning poles, or in a gas company you might report on corrosion or valves not operating. So it was sort of a limited thing. And what really I think sort of inhibited getting further into the maturity was the lack of information about other factors, and because they were all over the place in different databases and so forth. So you really never had an opportunity to do really good condition-based maintenance. A little bit of reliability, but not very much. So it's primarily preventative, a little bit of condition, maybe a little bit of reliability-centered maintenance.
Yeah, that sort of sums up my experience as well. But I am now interested to hear about what the audience is and where they're at in their maturity curve. So we have another quick poll, and based upon those 5 maintenance strategies that I just described, which of these best describes your utility and where it's at within its maturity? So are you still at operate to fail? Is that where the majority of your maintenance programming is done, where you don't really have any scheduled? It's effectively maintain and report on exceptions. Have you moved to preventive, which is more time-based? Have you introduced the concepts of health indexing? Have you moved into reliability center maintenance, where you've added such things as risk and criticality and the failure code analysis? Or you move right into that top tier, as we're talking about, and really completely understand your assets and the values financially and capital forecast investments in relation to all those other parameters. So just select one of these. We'll give you another couple of seconds to think about this one. Okay, so we've got the results back in. So Bill, what do you make of these results?
Yeah, it's pretty much my experience. Most people are in the preventative mode. Some are doing condition-based. I'm guessing that if people had to guess, they'd pick one or the other, and so therefore those results are pretty much consistent with my experience. And as I discuss, going around the world talking to utilities, this is pretty much what's going on. Yeah, good.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. So this is pretty much what I was expecting as well. I am pleasantly surprised that we're seeing some utilities already moving into that optimized state, which is really creating that holistic view. So we continue now. What we'd like to do now is, we're here for an asset management on GIS, and I want to take you through how GIS is actually being used to support this. Now, when we look at this, it's very difficult for some of these utilities to actually transition and move from this operate to fail to optimize. And we like to think of it that we're moving from a very passive state through preventative into proactive to be predictive and eventually prescriptive. But there's often constraints within those utilities that are actually, holding people back or preventing people to move from one tier to the next. So Bill, based on your experience, like, why is it that, even your experience, even that you're unable to really move too far beyond preventative to be condition and then up? Like, what are some of the constraints that it might hold utilities back?
Well, I think you look at that first left-hand box of the asset data. I think the problem is people just don't have a good handle on all aspects of their data. The historic data, they don't have a good handle necessarily on the currency of the data. Even when people do inspections, if they're doing it on paper, I mean, we still find a lot of people doing things on paper, and it's such an obstacle of doing kind of optimization when you're on paper, because it's just hard to accumulate. When people make changes on the paper, then it's hard to read it. I mean, it's just a mess. And so I think it's also kind of a cultural thing too, is we've always done it this way, and why would we change? So I think those are the kind of the things that really are the obstacles.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So we're just going to run another poll now, just quickly, just to gauge some insights into, what are some of the constraints in your utility that are preventing you, or that you've identified, or from your understanding about, moving from one of these tiers to the next? What are the constraints that you feel that are holding you back, or that your company just isn't mature enough yet, or you haven't got the right set of data? Is it the fact that you don't have historical data, where you don't have your failure rates, or the asset location, or the change outs? Is it the inspection data? Are you really still just using paper, which means, to digitize that and actually get that analytics is very difficult? Is it your ability to manage risk, which is the likelihood and consequences of failure? Is it a culture issue, that this is the way we've always done, we always do polls every 5 years, we're not going to change this? Or is it just there's a general lack of understanding within your utility of what some of these best practices, such as ISO 55000, have released, and then how to adopt those into your organization? So you can select one of the following. I'll give you another couple of seconds. Okay, the results are in. So a little bit surprising on this one, Bill, but probably not unexpected. So difficult to change the culture. So, I think this is I think there's a combination here from my experience where it's a little bit of, we don't want to change what we've always done because we've been doing it this way. And any change actually introduces risk into the organization. So, if we were to move away from doing, as I said, like polls every 5 years into, well, we want to make it every 6 years. Yes, that'll save us a lot of money. But that you've got to manage that risk, and you've got to understand, what does that mean if something was to go wrong? So is that a fair summary, Bill? Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not overly surprised. The culture is always sort of at the top of the list. It's very difficult to change what people have been so used to, because, in effect, it's been working for them for so long. And we are in a safety environment here, so people are concerned about safety. So when you change something, you're worried that you're introducing some safety issues or some risk issues. Or what if I make a mistake? What if I change the way I do and I make a mistake and something bad happens? So not overly surprising. There was another one about general lack of understanding of best practices. Actually, that rated reasonably high. That was actually number 2. So hopefully we'll describe some of these best practices as we go forward in this webinar.
Absolutely. So let's move on to that and start, positioning, how we can actually help utilities transition through this. Now, the way that we like to talk about it in Esri and the ArcGIS platform is that we have what we can call a complete GIS. And there's 3 main pillars in this. There's a system of record, there's a system of engagement, and there's a system of insight. So the system of record is about our authoritative data. It's the single source of truth. Then we have this system of engagement, which is where we actually light up an organization through sharing and collaboration. And this is both internal to your organization and external to the stakeholders. Now, the final one is the system of insights, where you turn all this information into decision-making, and that's done through visualization and analytics. And we really see this as the enabler for aligning utilities, for all these missions that you see at top. So, as I said, we've already run the webinar on safety, and how we engage in through, grid modernization, network modernization. But the other ones that we're going to talk about, as we roll through this, is customer experience and innovation. But today we're focused in on asset management. So what we're really going to focus in now is how our complete GIS, ArcGIS solution, is actually enabling these utilities to solve these business problems and help them mitigate those constraints that they're seeing, and move into best practice asset management. So as we touched on at the start in the agenda, there's 3 main things we're going to be talking about today, which is the lifecycle management, the performance assessment, and the optimization. So we're going to start with the life cycle management, and I think it's really important that we understand the data that's required to set up such things as a preventative or routine maintenance plan. So typically, we're looking for the history of the asset. So what has happened to the asset? How old is it? We need the age of the asset, and we need to understand those sort of details as well, and estimated remaining life based upon when you put in the asset. We bring in a little bit of location now as well into this, and we can really start to visualize and optimize some of the value propositions utilities can get, even if they're only at the preventative routine level. So there's a lot of value that you can get just by bringing location and getting greater insights into how your network is performing through these maintenance strategies. So this is where I'm going to introduce Tyler, who's going to take us through our first demonstration on just having those simple bits of data and how your asset management plans can already be optimized through preventative. So over to you, Tyler.
Great, thanks, Matt. So something you alluded to earlier about how ArcGIS has been used or is used as that system of record for utility networks, that's something that's been really occurring for some time now. And even though the technology has evolved significantly throughout that time, the goal has always been to create a true digital representation of your network. So here we can see kind of with our electric network, we can see where we have our circuits, our poles, and kind of the same thing with the gas network. We see our mains, our pipes, and valves. And then we can even start to do some quick reporting off of that. So I can see how many wood poles I have, how many valves I have, the install date for my poles, I get a nice breakdown, and then the valve type, right? So how much is steel versus or compared to plastic. But a crucial element in this is being able to integrate with your other enterprise systems, including your asset management system. So what that would allow me to do is zoom into this particular area, and I can click on one of these poles, and I'm able to pull in that information from our EAM system. So I can see what type of pole it is, it's a wood pole. I can see the installation date, and then based off the wood and that installation date, I can expect a certain amount of years remaining. In this case, it's 41 years for the life of the pole. I can also see the last time it was inspected and when we expect to inspect this asset once again. So now that we've begun to gather this information, and now we're starting to see it in our map, we can now look at our network from a different perspective. So what I've done in this dashboard was taken all of our poles from before, and that top map has filtered out all the poles that are following their maintenance cycle, meaning the ones we see here have surpassed their maintenance cycle. And I can tell by the color scheme that those yellow ones that just surpassed that next inspection date, while the ones in red have surpassed it for some time. And in a similar light, we took all the poles in the bottom map to only show those that are past their expected lifespan. And then of course on our kind of our left-hand panel, we can then begin to report on that asset information. So I can see how many poles are past their inspection date. And on the bottom left, I can see how many poles total have surpassed their lifespan that we expect. And then in the middle there, we get that number out of the 8,300 wood poles. We can identify those 36 that have surpassed their inspection date and their life expectancy. So Bill, what do you think of, or what are your thoughts about how we're able to pull in some of this EAM data?
Well, see, this is really interesting because even though we're still at kind of the lower level of the preventative kind of maintenance practice, we're getting a lot of insight just by the visualization and the organization of data. Two ways: we're able to see it on a map, and also we're able to bring in information from the EAM and maybe even other information we'll look later. But this shows us additional kind of insight into what's happening. In many cases, people thought, well, you have to have all of the data in just the GIS to be able to do this. Absolutely not. It's easy to bring in data from other sources. That's terrific.
Yeah, so I agree with Bill. This is the simple question. So even as basic asset management, you want to know how many assets do I have? You're able to view that on a map very quickly. What type of assets they are. So your first graph showed, it's a wood pole or a steel pole. We also looked at it from a gas point of view. I know this, Tyler, you're focused in on the pole assets here. I know our data sets are very well built out for poles, but I think it's important as we go through this that we can relate anything we're doing here from poles to the gas network as well. An asset is an asset, and what we're really showing here is that it doesn't really matter what asset it is. The concepts and the application of this is consistent across all asset types. So yes, but, for your demonstration, you're going to be focusing on the poles, but if it was a gas valve, I mean, you can identify those same clusters, those same aging profiles. I mean, there's no difference, is there?
Exactly, good point.
Excellent. All right, well, I think that takes us to the first step, and already for Preventative, we're seeing value about bringing in location. Now, we spoke about moving that next one level up and starting to understand, okay, now we want to start bringing in the health index of our assets. So if we start understanding the condition of our assets, so this is typically we've gone out and we've had work orders created and we're capturing now some of the failure analysis, or we're understanding, you know, there has been a number of faults on that particular asset, or we're identifying that, you know, it might be trending to failure based on, you know, it's starting to lean or some other parameter. You're now bringing that in, and now we're really starting to understand, okay, we're now bringing in the health index component into our workflow, and we're moving into this condition-based. So Tyler, with this little bit more data and understanding the condition of our asset, what other insights can location start to expand on this data set?
Sure, so like we just saw, we were able to pull in some historical data about the asset, like its age and its inspection history, but once we incorporate that condition element, we can understand the health of all of our poles across our network. So if I were to click on this particular pole here by the lake, I have that original asset information, but I have a few different fields now to work with. So for example, I have something that indicates whether damage has been reported in the last inspection. And then from here, under the cause, I can see a failure code that's been generated that can then be translated down here. So here I can see that the damage was assessed beyond 2 meters on the pole. There's deterioration that's evident by either some kind of rot or decay that's been identified externally. So now that we've been able to document that and bring it in, we can now begin to calculate our health index for every single pole that makes up our network. Now what that allows us to do is take these poles and then be able to symbolize it by that health index. So now we can see from kind of a scale from red to green that a lot of our poles are, the last time we inspected them, they're doing fairly well, right? The yellow and green points, we have plenty of those. But if I turn those off and I just take a look at the ones that have moderate or poor conditions, we can now start to see clusters of our poles that are not really, or that are probably doomed to fail. Now from here, we can start to ask questions like, how come we have only certain clusters within neighborhoods that are failing, or why is this area around this lake really performing poorly? Now once we do that, I can take this map and bring it up top here, and then we can compare it with the 2 other maps we were just working with earlier. So we can start to see if there's a correlation between the health of our poles versus whether a pole has surpassed its maintenance cycle or whether a pole has exceeded its expected lifespan. So Bill, what do you think of this so far?
So what we're doing is we're walking up that ladder of those 6 Ps, and now we're getting a little bit higher into bringing some analytics, more data. I mean, the more data that we can bring to this asset management problem, the more insight that we'll get, and the finer tuning. We're actually doing, we're fine tuning our asset management process here by bringing in this more condition data, and that's terrific. So I think we're just getting a higher level of intelligence. We're becoming smarter about asset management. Matt?
Yeah, what this one says to me, and this is something I have found over my time as I tried to write return on investment business cases on why do we move to condition-based maintenance. See, very, very clearly here, I look at this and I see 2 things. The first is that we have a lot of assets that are past their life expectancy. That bottom right hand is showing here's a lot of assets that are past what we would have deemed to be their life expectancy. So if I was in asset management and this is what I had, this is effectively where I would now be defining these are the assets that I need to replace. So when I develop my capital refurbishment replacement programs, these are the poles that I'm going to be saying that we need to change out, and it's purely based upon age, because that's as much information as I had at that point in time. What Tyler's just done above, he's done another set of analysis and determined that there is huge clusters of poles that have come back and their assessment of their health is low. And there is a couple of overlaps, but there is an awful lot of overlaps here that he's indicating that these poles, based upon their condition, have a higher potential of failure than the other ones that are old. So just because it's old is not a direct indicator that that asset needs to be replaced or it's going to fail. So for me, this is the sort of insights you require in your utility to start driving your utility to move from preventative to condition. And it comes down to, we need to be investing in the areas of the network that are actually more likely to fail based upon the condition. So, you know, that's the sort of stuff that I see here, Tyler, and I think that's a really good summary. So let's continue this journey, because I think we're just getting started on the insights we're going to get now. So if we look at this now and say we're looking to move up the ladder again, as Bill explained, and we're starting to move into bringing in this, what we can talk about, the reliability center maintenance. So if you can see here now, location becomes a critical component. It actually has a factor in the weighting. But we also start bringing in these other data sets, such as the criticality of the asset. Where is it on the network? Is it influencing critical infrastructure? Are they life support customers? Is it feeding a hospital? This sort of analysis. But then we also bring in risk. What's the likelihood and what's the consequence of this asset if it failed? Through those sort of data sets and the health index, we can now start building up this performance management, where we start understanding the probability of failure, the mean time to repair, the mean time to failure, those sort of analytics. That then feeds into how we can actually drive and get insights into our maintenance strategies to drive reliability center maintenance. So Tyler, let's see how this performs.
Sure thing. So to the point you made earlier, the age of the pole and its maintenance status is not the only indicator of the condition or the potential failure of a pole. So now I want to start kind of interrogating the data a bit more to start understand what are some other factors at play. So if I take my top map and I zoom us in here around this lake, I do see some correlation, right? There are plenty of poles that are past their maintenance cycle and plenty more that are past their lifespan. But I also know that if these are all surrounding a lake, chances are there's a lot more moisture in the air or in the soil these poles are in, which is going to cause that rotting that we saw earlier. So to begin to identify other parts of our service territory that can be impacted by this kind of variable, I brought in a wetlands and flood zones map for us to understand where we have poles that are overlapping these particular areas. Okay, so now that I've kind of begun to understand that, I'm going to explore the map a bit more and bring us up here to this kind of the strip of poles that we're starting to see here. And if I look at my wetlands map, there's not really much going on here, right? So if I click on one of these poles and I read the damage that's been collected, it looks like we're actually experiencing some leaning that's likely been caused by wind. Okay, so if that's the case, I'm going to pull in our wind intensity map here at the bottom right, and now I can start to see areas like this one here that's in the middle of a wind tunnel that's going to see more and more leaning over time. Now, as I begin to make more and more of these observations, I start to understand more of the factors that are involved with the conditions and failures of our poles. So again, in this particular cluster, not much happening. There is a flood zone here, but nothing on the wind side. If I select another pole here and scroll down, all right, we have some deterioration, but this time it's by termites that have been eating away at the wooden poles. So if that's the case, I'm going to turn back to my bottom right map and then bring in our termite habitat boundaries so we can see that, well, this particular area here is infested with termites that we can see, but then I can zoom out and I can see other areas that are probably going to be impacted by termites if they haven't already. So we started to bring in some other factors that have likely caused, or that we know have caused, damage to our poles over time, but now we can look at other factors that could potentially impact our poles or help us understand which ones we need to prioritize. So to do that, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to bring in our fire hazard severity zone layer that shows us different parts in this area that have been deemed especially vulnerable to a wildfire due to their physical conditions. So even though certainly a wildfire could wipe out our poles, but I think the risk around or the outcome of a pole failing in these areas are much more severe than other parts of our network. So another factor we can also bring in is real-time traffic. So if I zoom in here, we can see different parts of this road network that's more congested with vehicles, which raises the likelihood of a car accident that could potentially harm one of our poles. Now, if we're going to look at real-time traffic, we should take a look at real-time weather as well. So here we brought in several different weather feeds from NOAA and other sources that allows us to gauge the current state of weather, in this case nationally. So those shaded different areas we see here are alerts that NOAA has issued. And since we're right in the middle of summer, we're going to see a lot of heat advisories or areas that are probably more prone to wildfires. You may have noticed before that we actually have wildfire features on our map, and these have been documented and recorded by local agencies, and as soon as they've reported it, we now have this incorporated into our layer. Now for reference, a lot of these layers we brought in is available through our Living Atlas that any ArcGIS user essentially has access to. So these would just be layers that you are able to grab, incorporate in your maps, and we do all the updating, or we work with NOAA and others to have these layers updated. So I realize we're certainly very focused on overhead assets at this point, but of course for our gas users, they're more concerned about their underground assets naturally. So they're not going to probably care as much about live traffic or termite boundaries, but I think Matt mentioned this earlier, I think the concept still remains valuable, how we can take all these different factors and maybe instead of a termite map or a traffic map, we bring in a corrosive soil map that shows us different soil types that are more corrosive to steel, and that could eventually erode or disintegrate that material over time. So I just threw a lot at everyone, but Bill, were there any major takeaways you can get from this?
Sure. So when I worked for the power company, I don't remember getting termite maps. I don't remember even having up-to-date flood maps. And in fact, these physical, because typically if you would have them, they would be on paper. But look what we've done. We've added all of these new layers, this termite layer, this fire layer, and even you could add another layer, like for example, areas that are prone to landslides. And of course, what does that do to poles, and what does that do to underground gas mains? It would destroy them. So this is really adding more and more information. Now, as Tyler points out, this is really easy to get. You just go on the web, and you don't even have to download it. It's just a service, and you just see it as if you had that data. And if somebody were to update that termite map or that flood map at the source, at the Conservation Commission or at the government, you would get that information immediately and be able to use it for your analytics. So as we're kind of walking up the ladder of more strategic information on our asset management, bringing in these layers, doing the analytics, doing the correlation is really what this reliability standard maintenance is all about, as well as looking at what the consequence of some of these things, like a consequence of fires. Very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Matt?
Yeah, no, Tyler, you threw a lot at us there. I look at this and I start thinking that understanding the condition is very important. But you can click on it, you can see common trends of fire. You can see that one around the lake was all rot, right? And then you had that wind tunnel one, and then you had the termite one. So we're getting the failure codes back. Now we've got to turn that into insights. By bringing in these other layers, you're validating the feedback you're getting from the field crews, and you're picking up trends and analytics to give you insights in how you can start adjusting perhaps your maintenance programs, or this could even start driving the way that you do your designs, right? So it doesn't really matter how much you do in a termite zone. It's effectively going to, if you put a wood pole in a heavy populated termite area, short of preventative maintenance putting a lot of termites poison in the ground, you're probably not going to be able to prevent a lot of damage to your poles. You're going to have to change your design to steel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, and then you reflected this back into the fire stuff, and for me that starts bringing in the criticality and the consequence. If I look at this fire stuff, if I know I've got an asset that is in poor condition, that is in one of these fire areas, that changes the prioritizations, I guess, on when I should act and how I should change my maintenance plans, because there is a high risk, and this is the same for gas network as well, that if you've got any asset that we've assessed here in one of these vulnerable areas that is a high risk asset that we've identified as in poor condition, the failure codes are indicating it, and it's in one of these high risk areas, these are the ones where we need to adjust our priorities, and we need to get out there and make sure that we're maintaining, to their optimal performance and getting them back into a good condition or some sort of replacement program, because you're now getting a better understanding of not only the risk but also the consequence of failure. Like an asset fails in one of these fire zones, and the consequences can be substantial, as we've seen. So I think really good insight, Tyler. Thank you. So the final stage now is that we start looking at, how do we move then from that reliability center maintenance into the state of optimization? And this is now bringing in some of our more advanced insights and analytics, but it's now looking holistically across all of our maintenance strategies. This is where we start moving just beyond about understanding our maintenance strategy, but we start bringing in our capital work strategy and our future forecasting and our operational strategy about how is our network actually operating right now? Are we bringing in some real-time data from the field? And this is how we start bringing in that holistic view of optimization. So Tyler, can you take us through the final step?
So the last part of this demo is really to start taking all of those insights that we started to gather and really bring it into something that we can visualize and be able to make decisions off of. So I took our health index map that we were working with before, and the first analysis we run was we incorporated all those physical factors that have impacted or could impact the condition of our poles, right? The wetlands, flood zones, fire zones, termite boundaries, and whatnot. And then we assigned a physical vulnerability rating to all of those poles here. So now we can start to see different parts of our networks that are more vulnerable to those physical conditions. The next step was really to take that original asset information we were working with before and understand the age of the pole and its inspection history, and then kind of add another layer of vulnerability to those particular poles. And that's how we came up with this vulnerability index here. And if you notice, a lot of the darker areas with higher vulnerability a lot of them are around the areas we saw poles in poor condition. Now, what is kind of interesting is this area here that's fairly vulnerable, but if we looked at our health index map, it showed actually a very kind of healthy area that we didn't see a lot of poor conditions. So if I turn this back on, that area was actually doing quite well, but because we see that it's a higher vulnerability grade, chances are something's brewing there or something can cause issues down the line that we need to be aware of. All right, so now that we run that analysis and we can now start to try to make some decisions based off of it, there was a few different ways we can go about approaching it. Now, a popular method within a lot of our customers is being able to report on this and be able to deliver this in a report like we're seeing here. And if you notice, this isn't only going to bring in everything that we covered today, but it's also going to bring in other information from different systems. So we can see the current SAIDI or the most recent SAIDI and safety scores. I get a count of my poles as well as transformers and service points. And I also understand how many critical customers we have within this particular circuit. And then from there, I get some statistics of our poles, and that's mainly what we've been able to collect today, the average age, inspection type. What's also kind of critical are those poles with missing attributes. So as we're running the analysis, it's also important to know which poles don't really have the required information. So chances are there's probably some poles we may have not realized were vulnerable or realized are past their lifespan because we just don't have the data. So it's really important to be aware of that. So this is certainly a very popular way of being able to report and share these kind of insights. But another method we explored is taking that original map we saw and incorporate it into a dashboard that allows us to interact with this data. So I'm going to bring my map back here. And the first thing I want to do in here is look at how we are currently going about our inspections or replacement schedules. So if I turn that map on, we can see all the poles that will either be inspected or replaced in the next 6 months. And I notice a couple different things. One, there's no real spatial patterns, so the poles are really just scattered across our network. We do have a little clusters, but there's no really strategy around how do we prioritize these poles spatially. We're really just they're really just scattered here. But the other thing I noticed too is that a lot of these poles are already kind of healthy. So obviously that's not going to stop us for inspecting it, but I feel like if we're going to be replacing poles, we definitely want to target more that are in poor condition or that are more vulnerable. So to help us start kind of understanding how we can prioritize these poles, I'm going to turn back to my original map. I'm going to turn to my right-hand panel that looks at our vulnerability of our poles. And the first thing I'll do is apply a filter that's going to look at all these poles according to their vulnerability index. So now we've filtered out a good amount here. And if I look at the bottom, we can see that we're now at 683 polls past their lifespan, starting off at 1,500. You know, we kind of filtered out a good chunk. And now we're looking at 48 polls past inspection date from 110. That's a good subset. But if I look at my average health, a lot of these polls are still fairly healthy. And although they are vulnerable, chances are we need to probably prioritize on the ones with poor health. So now kind of moving over to my left, I'm gonna go through our health index. I'm gonna filter out all the ones that are in good condition. So now in our map, we're looking at a very specific subset of polls that have an average health index of 2.3 out of 5. And we have a much smaller subset of these polls that we're targeting that are past their lifespan or their inspection date. And now we can get very strategic on how we start to address these polls. Maybe we send someone out or send a team out to target this area, and maybe another group for these different neighborhoods that we're seeing here. So Bill, how do you think we wrapped up all the insights we started to gather and the information we pulled from our asset management system?
Well, this is great. So when I started, I talked about the different stakeholders, the maintenance people that I had working for me, or the engineers who, so maintenance, and then capital, and then financial, and then customer care. So what we've done is we've kind of allowed everybody to see what the other person could see. Kind of this notion of see what others can't, see what the maintenance people can see that the capital people couldn't see. And we brought it all together in what ISO 55000 says is what we need is transparency. And what you've done is you've been able to show all of these results in kind of a single view, what sometimes people in the IT world say, a single pane of glass, a dashboard that allows everybody to get together, collaborate, and coordinate what their work is to do in the future. So this is about, okay, all of this analysis is terrific. What do I do now? Now I create the plan. This is what I do. And hopefully that plan optimizes the capital resources, the maintenance resources, and all of the financial resources for the company. So Matt, take it away.
No, I think you've summarized that very well. And Tyler, I think that's a really nice dashboard about how we bring this all together. So we started the conversation with just saying we're going to go out and have a capital plan based upon the age of the asset. So anything that was old, we replace. We moved through and identified, well, there's a lot of assets that had, you know, poor condition that weren't old, you know, so we effectively now indicated that perhaps we need to change our focus and, you know, move towards the assets that are in poor condition and not so much age. Then we brought in the vulnerability stuff and the RCM about failure, previous histories and failures, and where are we most vulnerable on the network based upon, it could be feeding, you know, a critical customer, it could be, you know, in a critical part of the network based upon, you know, school zones and all this other stuff in our vulnerability weighting. And at the end of it now we have a very succinct subset of this is the highest priority areas of where we need to do our asset management plans. We're always forced or challenged to do stuff, you know, do work with resource constraints or financial constraints. So if your operational budget is dropping, you need to work smarter and actually understand where are the highest priority parts of our network that we can focus on. This sort of analysis and these sort of steps that we've worked through today is the justification to help you support, you know, the way that you can actually move through these and stand behind the decisions that you're going to make. So I think what Tyler's done here is a really nice example of build this story up and then show how you can optimize your maintenance programming at the end through the power of location. So thanks, Tyler. I really appreciate that. Now we move through and just sort of recap. You know, I've just stepped through what we've done in the workflow and all the different data sets that have come together. So really what we're talking about here, that, you know, we started with this concept of lifecycle management, and we talked about, you know, identifying the need, planning, and moving through to effectively decommissioning your assets. But it's so much more than that, and this it's a holistic approach. So lifecycle asset management requires a holistic and an integrated approach. And the best way that we really have seen this to come together is through the power of location. As Bill said, it helps you see what others can't. It brings all these different data sets together from different asset management systems through your OT data, through your IT data, and gives you that insight to better understand how your network is performing. So we just recap, you know, we talked about moving from this operational through to tactical into the strategic view. And then we walked up this ladder, and Bill sort of covered that very well. We then use location as the centerpiece to bring all this together and help you as a utility move through these different phases to start working towards these ISO 55000 and best practice asset management. And there's a great quote on here that every asset has a location and every location has a story to tell. And that quote came from Tyler. And I think it really does sum up exactly what we're talking about here, that the location is the way that we can bring the story together, because the location holds so much more information than just the asset itself. And when you bring it all into context about all those other layers we had, it's a really, really strong, compelling story to enable your utility. So I really hope you've got a lot out of today's webinar. I'm going to leave you with a couple of takeaways. We do have a landing page set up on Esri on our electric site. There's some great brochures, some blogs, some articles. There's a white paper coming out. This is about our story and asset management and how we can build it out in your utility. So, we're really trying to help utilities modernize how they manage their assets by supporting you through these best practice and industry standards. And as Tyler demonstrated, we have a lot of examples that we can talk through on lifecycle asset management, performance assessment, and optimization. So feel free to jump onto our website. We have one for electric and one for gas. So there's two different stories and two different perspectives there. So please engage. But speaking of engagement, we're not done yet with our GeoConnects community engagement. We've done our webinar on safety, grid mod, and now asset management. We do have a webinar coming up on customer experience on October 9th. So please register for that one. And then we'll finish this year with our largest GIS utility conference in the world, which is going to be held in Atlanta, and that's between October 27th to 30th. We do still have a call for papers open for another week as well. So if you've got a story to tell or something you'd like to share, and it may be on asset management and what you're doing to showcase asset management, please jump online and register. We're still taking paper submissions. But if not, please register. We'd love to see you there, and we'd love to catch up and hear what you're doing with GIS. We also have a heavy social engagement on LinkedIn, Twitter, and we have our GeoNet community. So they're all links on our webpage as well. So please engage. We'd love to hear what you're doing. Now we still have about 9 minutes left of our webinar, so we do have some time for some questions. So they're just coming up in front of me. We have a number to work through. There's a couple of key themes that have been bundled up, so I'll try and summarize these ones as best as I can. The first one, we've illustrated pulling data in from an EAM or an asset manager system. Was that a live link or was it an export, and how often? Tyler, you want to take this one?
I can take this one. So I think for the purposes of this demo, this was an export from an EAM, and that's how many of our customers are doing it today. But I think it's worth noting that the way the software has evolved and the way we architect our technology now, making it a bit more services based, we can start tapping into these different systems using REST services or using web services instead of having to establish a client desktop, client and database connections that are a bit more difficult for integrations, while we can kind of leverage that services-based architecture to help us do that. So the demo today was for an export, but certainly that live link, that direct connection is supported one way or another, probably through some kind of web service.
Yeah, thanks. You just touched on something else. So if I can expand on that, we didn't really talk too much on it, but one of the attributes you showed was that you had 79, I think, assets or something along those lines where you're missing data. I mean, we didn't really talk about mobility, but as far as pulling data from your EAM, we have a number of mobility platforms and that, I mean, we can really expand the improvement of data quality, can't we, by getting our, a digital capability to out in the field, and that just updates back into their asset management systems.
Yeah, so it can work both ways. We can pull from asset management system, and we can also push updates to that system as well.
I'd just like to add one other point, that for years when people were building the GIS, they really loaded it up with a lot of attribute, a lot of information that was really contained in other systems. So you had this possibility of duplication of data and inconsistencies. By having data be directly linked to your EAM, you eliminate that altogether. It's as if you had that data in the GIS, but it's really being managed through other systems. But it's a seamless integration.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think we can probably continue. The next question that's popped up is that the demo was for poles, and we have a pole inspection app using Collector. How do I pull data into that analysis system that you demonstrated? So probably just extend on
Yeah,
talking about,
and
Tyler, I think.
that's kind of interesting because I remember the poll from earlier. So 20% of the people today are using GIS for their asset management. So the thing we demonstrated was pulling the condition from the EAM, but chances are we have a lot of users that are actually using our technology to update these assets with their conditions. So certainly, you can certainly continue to use Collector, and we can incorporate the results of Collector and even use some kind of automation to take what you collect out in the field and to calculate that health index that we saw. So I know that question was particularly for Collector. I think Survey 123 would also be a really good mobile application for this, since it's more form-centric, it's more flexible. So like, if you answer certain questions in your survey, it will pop up with more particular questions based off your answers. So definitely a couple different ways you can address this on through our mobile apps.
Thanks, Tyler. All right, we got 5 minutes left, and we probably would like to get through a couple more questions if we can. There's a question about the asset health index, and how was that calculated, and does it have to come from GIS, or can it be brought in from other systems? So, I mean, I can probably take that one. The answer is both. So the capabilities in here that you can add weightings and overlays into your data and effectively derive the health index. But we're well aware that there's actually partner solutions and other systems that specialize in this space. So if you have a system already that is doing the health indexing, so it's actually deriving the asset health based upon, I mean, it could be on a power transformer, for example, and you've got the real time, or you've got the oil analysis coming in for DGA analysis. We're not going to be doing the oil analysis calculations within Esri, but we can definitely consume that health index that's coming back through and bring that information through to light up through the analysis that we've done. But likewise, if it's simple assets based upon the number of failures that it's occurred, or the age, and potentially some of the failure codes that are coming back in, we can add that sort of analysis in and develop some health indexing as well. So it can be done both ways, but I guess it depends on the asset and it depends on the level of detail you really want to get down to. So I hope that answered that question. Next one, to do what you've shown, does all the data need to be in ArcGIS, or can I just work with it where it is? That's probably one for you, Tyler.
Yeah, so it kind of comes back to that first question about us pulling in data from EAM. So like I mentioned, we have users that are doing both. They're exporting it, they're extracting it from a system, and then they're bringing it into their geo databases and they're working with it. But that's not necessarily required, and we wouldn't necessarily encourage you to store everything within a GIS. You have your different systems for very specific purposes, so I think it's crucial that it stays that way, but still giving us the ability to tap into it, whether that's an extract and we're working within our geodatabase format, or we're using web services that makes it more of a direct connection.
Yeah, well put. Bill, is there anything else? We got about 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to sort of wrap up on those questions, or any additional feedback?
Yeah, again, I think this idea of web services is just so powerful, because what we saw even during the demo was, say, for example, I used the floodplain. Floodplain information it's not stored in the utility. It's coming from somewhere else, and that somewhere else could be another person using ArcGIS or even some other GIS. We're pulling it in and being able to use it as if it was part of our data, but it's not. It points directly to it, and that whole idea of currency of information is critical to asset management. The data has got to be up to the minute, current, to be able to do this to be able to do this analysis. And it also goes back to what I think, Matt, you said earlier: mobility. Getting that information not on paper, but getting it through like Collector or Survey 123, again, using web services, bringing that data in, showing it immediately. Something happens into the field, it happens immediately into the office, and everybody sees it. And this is whole notion of what ISO 55000 really proposes. We've got to have transparency across the enterprise, and that's what this platform really does.
Yeah, nice way to wrap it up. So we are just about out of time. So before we wrap up, I'd like to thank my Esri colleagues here and for contributing today. So Tyler and Bill, thank you very much. I really do hope that everyone has found some insightful information from today, and there's some stuff that you'll take back to your utility. As we said, this recording will be made available, and it'll be an email link will be sent out within the week. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.